Thank you very much. I'm honored to speak to you today about Canada's response to the Syrian refugee crisis. As you know, 9 months ago, the lifeless body of 3-year-old Aylan Kurdi washed ashore in Turkey. We cannot forget the picture of Aylan on the beach, his red shirt, his blue shorts, his tiny shoes still on his tiny feet. Those images broke our hearts. Our collective conscience could not ignore the devastating injustice of Aylan's death or the larger tragedy the event came to represent. The world seemed to pause and say, no more. Undeniably, the pictures of Aylan changed the domestic and international politics of the Syrian refugee crisis. However, before that turning point, Prime Minister Trudeau had expressed his passionate belief that Canada could do so much more to help the innocent victims of the war in Syria. He resolved that Canada should resettle 25,000 Syrian refugees as soon as possible. Today, I am very proud to say that since October 2015, Canada has welcomed over 27,000 Syrian newcomers into our beautiful country. It is an amazing accomplishment and a promise fulfilled. It took hope, it took a lot of hard work, and yes, it took the Honourable John McCallum, but together we made it happen. Our government allocated the resources and private citizens went the extra mile. Of the 27,000 Syrian newcomers, nearly 10,000 are privately sponsored by citizens. I believe the government's policy of opening our doors and our hearts to those in need reflects our deeply held Canadian values. Vincent Massey, the first Canadian-born Governor-General, once said, "Nations achieve great character in crisis. It is of such moments in history that nations seem to say to themselves, 'I live for something.' For what? What do I value above all?" My fellow Canadians, we showed our highest values when we made Syria's crisis Canada's crisis. We showed that Syrian lives matter to us, as all lives matter to us. We chose to value compassion, we chose to value kindness, and we chose to value justice. And while others have closed their doors to this population, it must be said that we chose to value diversity. As a Syrian Canadian, I want to tell you that these are not uniquely Canadian values. They are universal values based on reason and empathy. Compassion, kindness, justice, and a belief in diversity do transcend culture and nationality. But we must acknowledge today that it was this Prime Minister and this government that restored those values to Canada's public policy. The decision to massively expand our resettlement efforts has proven to the world and to ourselves that Canada is once again a leader in refugee resettlement and a champion of the human rights enshrined in our charter. The situation in Syria is the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. The conflict has displaced more than half of Syria's population. It has created 4.8 million refugees, 75% of which are women and children. Remember Aylan on the beach. Then think of that number. 500,000 people and counting. The world must not turn away, and Canadians are certainly not turning away. By the end of this year, more than 17,000 additional Syrian refugees will arrive in our country. The Canadian public has the will and desire to help refugees fleeing violence and oppression. Canada has a mostly proud history of welcoming refugees, most notably in 1979, when Canada brought 60,000 Vietnamese boat people to our shores in just 18 months. Refugees and immigrants make up the social fabric of our great and multicultural country. Welcoming newcomers with open arms is a tradition we carry on from Canada's Indigenous peoples, who helped the European arrivals on these shores to adapt to life in these lands. We are a country of immigrants and refugees, and as the Prime Minister has said countless times before, we are strong not in spite of our differences, but because of them. Looking back, it's clear that as the Syrian conflict grew worse, we needed a government that would create the opportunity for Canadians to help the refugees. The people in this room helped make that possible. And as a Syrian Canadian, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. The work, of course, is not over. The Canadian people continue to show generosity, compassion, and warmth to Syrian newcomers as we help them, our new neighbors, settle into Canadian life. For Syrians, the adjustments are not always easy. Right away, there's a language barrier. They're adjusting to a new culture, new traditions, new customs, worried about finding jobs and providing for their families, not to mention the trauma that they bring with them from the war. It is now our responsibility as Canadians to help them integrate into their new life here and ensure that there are many success stories, as I know there inevitably will be. Syrian newcomers have already made us strong by affirming our national values. And in the years to come, they will make our country stronger in practical ways. As Minister McCallum said, this is a short-term investment for a long-term gain. In fact, many studies have demonstrated the contribution that refugees make to our economy. From Europe, we have new evidence that investing €1 in welcoming refugees can bring nearly €2 in economic benefits within just 5 years. While in some places in the world, Syria's refugees have been met with fear or suspicion, or treated as a burden, here in Canada, we welcome them as future citizens, employees, and leaders. Leaders like former Governors General Michael Jean and Adrienne Clarkson, who arrived to Canada as refugees. As well as the Honourable Mariam Monsef, Minister of Democratic Institutions, who arrived in Canada as a refugee as well. We welcome Syria's newcomers as our equals, as citizens in the making. Already, we have seen this kindness returned. In Fort McMurray's Hour of Need, Syrian newcomers in Calgary came together to give what little they could to help, proving that sometimes giving a little means a whole lot. Each one of us is doing our part in this national project. For myself, I am a co-founder and director of Jasur, which means bridges in Arabic. Our NGO provides hundreds of university scholarships to Syrian students so that they may continue their education and have a brighter future for themselves and their families. In addition, I am a board member at Lifeline Syria. Lifeline Syria was actually modeled after Operation Lifeline, which was an initiative for Canadians to privately sponsor Vietnamese, Cambodians, and Laotians. Lifeline Syria launched in June 2015 with a very modest goal of resettling 1,000 privately sponsored Syrian refugees in the Greater Toronto Area in 2 years. Now, the difference between Operation Lifeline and Lifeline Syria is that back then it was largely faith-based groups acting as private sponsors. Today, along with those faith-based groups, we have what I like to call the unusual suspects. They are school associations, universities, law offices, book clubs, choir groups, and groups of friends just banding together to help. Now that the newcomers have arrived, with many more on the way, the questions have become, how do we help these newcomers find opportunity and success? How do we as a country leverage their talents as quickly and as fully as possible? We know that newcomers can be innovative. They are 3 times more likely than their Canadian counterparts to hold a PhD. They're more likely to open a business. And their children have the potential to be exceptional and to build on their parents' hard work and success. At the same time, we have all heard of barriers to economic participation, and newcomers don't always reach their full potential. For example, our country faces chronic underemployment. This means that newcomers are employed, but too often doing jobs far below their skill set and far below their education level. CIBC estimates that this lost opportunity costs our economy more than $20 billion. But with the Syrian newcomers, we have something we didn't have before: those unusual suspects. These new players include Canada's private sector, which has responded with unprecedented enthusiasm to support the Syrian newcomers. Canada's companies are front and center in our response to this crisis. Many see it as a business and moral imperative. I'm very happy to tell you that cooperation between the private and public sectors has gotten the resettlement process off to an amazing start. Canada's companies, communities, and NGOs have raised more than $30 million to help Syrian newcomers not only integrate, but succeed. In addition, new investments in social infrastructure will have a lasting positive impact beyond the Syrian resettlement. The lessons we're learning today will help improve the immigration system and other systems for all immigrants, not just Syrians. This means that Canada will be better prepared at the municipal, provincial, and federal level for future international humanitarian crises. In working with Syrian newcomers, I can confidently say that what is happening in our country is unprecedented. Yes, we have done this before, most famously with the Vietnamese boat people, but never have we had so many unusual suspects come together in such a significant way. At the heart of these efforts stand our citizens, who are facilitating the integration of Syrian families through so many amazing, excellent grassroots initiatives. Canadians have not only stepped up by sponsoring Syrian refugees, but also by embracing the government-sponsored refugees, creating similar support systems and initiatives that are available to the privately citizen-sponsored refugees. This commitment will help to reduce the gap that historically has existed between the two groups. In closing, I would love to share a little story with you. Last week, I visited a Syrian family who recently arrived through the private sponsorship program. I had the great pleasure of meeting their 2 young daughters. Naham, the youngest, is 4 years old. That's the same age I was when I came to Canada. It was amazing to look into Naham's eyes and know she would have the same experiences and opportunities that I had growing up in Canada. Her happiness is a result of Canadians opening our hearts and our homes to hundreds of little girls like her and their families. I know that there will be a bright future ahead for Naham. As a Syrian, I am horrified at what is happening to my country of origin. But as a Canadian, I am incredibly proud of our willingness to welcome and support another wave of newcomers. This is the Canada that I know. This is the Canada that I love. And this is the Canada that I know we all want to build for the next generation, one with the strength to uphold our values. Thank you so much.